All right, well, good. So while they interpret into my English, our English into Spanish, we're going to go ahead and speak in English, and then maybe once in a while we might get excited and start speaking in Spanish. So, my happy place, there's always a happy place for everybody, right? My happy place is when the Dodgers are up 3-0, and right now it's 2-1, third inning. And so hopefully the Dodgers win tonight. It's been a long time coming after millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars spent, in which we could have used that money here for the Salton Sea. But in any event, I just want to welcome all of you for being here. Appreciate you being here. We're going to do introductions in a bit, but before we do introductions, I just want to let you all know that it was important for us to come to the community and present you more information regarding the Salton Sea North Lake pilot project. We have more information, more data, more research that really helped us better understand where we currently are. We had anticipated a larger project, but because of the results that we received from the data, it is half the size, but we're going to get you more information as we move forward. And so with that, housekeeping. We are having interpretation. We have pan dulce. It seems like we got Starbucks coffee. There's water. I assume there's restrooms over here to my right, to your left. Correct? And I don't know who's cooking, but when I was walking in, the firefighters must have been cooking up tacos because it smelled pretty good. I don't know if we're invited to that yet, but we stick around long enough, we might be. But with that said, folks, I also have staff here. Margarita, she's on my staff. She's here to help me out whenever I get into a little, I don't know, clutch, if you will. I need someone to make sure they hit a home run and get me going. And then we also have, obviously, county staff. And we also have Juan. Hey, Juan, what is today again? National Oatmeal Day. So hopefully everyone had their oatmeal this morning. Makes you strong, right, Juan? It keeps you regular. Okay. You heard it from the one who knows. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Juan, and everyone else will introduce themselves.
Great. Thank you, Supervisor. Buenas noches. Mucho gusto. Juan Perez with the County Riverside Chief Operating Officer. I want to say for those on Zoom, si están en Zoom y quieren oírlo en español, si van a la parte de abajo de la página, hay un botón que dice Interpretation. Así que si están en Zoom y lo quieren oír en español, por favor, abajo de la página, el botón que dice Interpretation. Y vamos esta noche a darle información en lo último en este proyecto. Tonight we're going to give you a lot of information as to the latest on this project, and I'm going to turn it over to Chuck with the project team, and then Patrick for introductions.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Chuck Greeley. I'm the Director of Engineering for the consulting firm Dudek. We have an office in La Quinta. I'm an Indio resident, 20-year. So very excited to work on this project. The Salton Sea's fascinated me for as long as I've been here. Fascinates my kids. I have twin 15-year-old boys who are just as in love with the sea as I am. And what a background to talk about projects on the sea tonight. So very excited to be here, very excited to present tonight, and thank you for joining us.
Good evening. My name is Patrick O'Dowd. I'm the Executive Director of the Salton Sea Authority. This project is actually being funded through a Prop 68 grant, which was secured in 2018. And we've been working through the challenges associated with identifying a project for this financing. Chuck will go over some of that a little bit tonight. But we settled on a project some years back, had to do some geotech, but this is a feasibility, this is a demonstration project. So we knew that there was a lot that we didn't know when we came into this project. And as a result of the diligence that we did, we believe that we've identified the best project for this site with the resources that are available and the technical challenges that we have to overcome. I'm excited. It's just really such a beautiful place, and I look forward to this and many more projects that we're going to move forward with throughout the years.
Oh, well, thank you for that. So Is there a slide presentation?
Yeah, Chuck's gonna give a slide presentation.
Okay, good. So just very quickly, let me just set a tone here. You know, obviously, we are all concerned with the Salton Sea. We've been now for decades, potentially even generations. And, you know, time after time, many things have been promised. And unfortunately, those promises have not always have come to fruition. There has been some good change, but we have a long ways to go. And unfortunately, how I see this is that this is or could be a crisis for different reasons. You know, obviously on one aspect, the environmental side of it all, it could be an environmental crisis, an economic crisis as well, obviously hurting our economy here on the east end potentially, and the Coachella Valley into Imperial County. But as well, quite frankly, and perhaps maybe even more importantly, a public health crisis. We're talking about humankind, and we're talking about individuals that live near the Salton Sea. But what's interesting to me is that because of the fact that it's taking us so long to get here right now, it seems to me like it's a crisis in slow motion. But we need to understand that we need to recognize and should have a sense of urgency. And that sense of urgency should not only come from us here locally, but it should be at all levels of government. Whether that be at the federal level, whether that be at the state level, whether that be at the regional level, county, and whether that be at the local level. Because we could not afford, for all those three aspects that I just mentioned, public health, environmental, economics, to allow this to become an area that unfortunately could hurt our families, could hurt our community, and could hurt our region overall. And so we need to, in my opinion, change the culture as to how we look at the Salton Sea. And let me tell you what I mean by that. You know, when I first started in the legislature, I'll give you an example. And back in 2007, 2008, and Denise DeChaney was already our senator up there, and she was working on legislation. John Benoit as well was the senator at the time. And then before them, I believe it was Juan Vargas. And they tried to work on the Salton Sea and only got so far. While I was in the state assembly, I remember bringing up the Salton Sea and no one even knew where it was. No one even knew what it was. No one cared for that matter. It took a while to educate individuals to make them understand that the Salton Sea is a lake. It's very real. It's here in our own backyard in the east end. And it could become a disaster if we allow it to become a disaster. And therefore, we need to change the culture, meaning the attitude as to how we act on behalf of the Salton Sea, what decisions we make on behalf of the Salton Sea, what resources and policies we pass on behalf of the Salton Sea, what organizations we work with, and nonprofits, and action committees, and the community, so that we can all move at the same time together forward. It took a long time to get us somewhere. And we did pass some legislation while I was there, and I'm proud to have passed some legislation there. But I'll tell you, we are now at a critical point where we need to do something and move dirt, in my opinion, not for the sake of moving dirt, but demonstrate through a pilot project that something can be done and be effective. And that's what we're going to talk to you about today. Now, one last point I want to make. Secretary Wade Crowfoot, under the leadership of Governor Newsom, has been an outstanding individual. The Department of Natural Resources has been outstanding, and what I mean by that, just like it was back in the day in 2008, 2009, 2010, those individuals were not coming to the Salton Sea. Maybe once every few years, if that. Newsom has come down already at least 3 or 4 times. and he's actually visited the sea, the south end and the north end. Secretary Wade Crowfoot has come down even more, and his staff at Natural Resources have as well. And what I'd like to also say is that before we did not have a partnership with folks up there. Now we do. The Department of Natural Resources and other entities are actually working hand in glove, if you will, with the County of Riverside, as well as with Dudek, and as well as with folks like yourselves. Even, for example, nonprofit organizations that are on the ground receiving funding from the legislature, from resources that are coming down the pike up there. That itself has changed the momentum, I think. But I just want to make sure that we do not let off the gas pedal. We need to continue to press on the gas pedal and push as much as possible. And these next couple of years are going to be even more critical because the legislature will be making more decisions, especially when we're talking about budget deficits. So we cannot allow this to linger. We cannot allow this to falter. We need to continue to push the agenda and advocate on behalf of our own backyard, because if it's not us, then who is it going to be? So I want to just say thank you all for being here, because I appreciate your advocacy. You could be out, you could be watching a Dodger game right now. I hope we're still up. But nonetheless, though, here we are, and we're talking about a real issue that's impacting our families. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Chuck.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Chuck Riley.
Yep. So I just want to provide a little bit of tone setting. I think the supervisor's done a great job expressing the urgency. We've seen some exciting things happen at the south end of the sea. The Species Conservation Habitat Project, which many of you have hopefully heard about, thousands of acres of habitat being built, but not a lot of action at the north end of the sea. And so there's not been a lot of data gathered. There's not been a lot of information. We're really faced with a challenge of answering a lot of unknowns and a lot of questions. So to Patrick's point earlier, I want to highlight and give a little context to what we're going to talk about today. And we've heard the name, the North Lake Pilot Demonstration Project. Well, in that context, what is a pilot demonstration project? And so I wanted to start today by just highlighting some of the features of that. So this is a small-scale project. It's intended to evaluate, test, and gather information on a new approach, some new technologies, and new processes to solve issues at the Salton Sea in this real-world setting. We're assessing possibilities, identifying constraints, really understanding the practical implications of what future projects may look like for the sea. This allows us to refine methods, address those challenges we hadn't known about, provide insights, and really guide future planning and execution of projects based on the results of our pilot project. So I just give this because there's literally tens of thousands of acres around the sea, and we're talking about a 100-acre footprint. But it is informative. It really is testing what we know and what we can accomplish around the sea. So where are we today? What are some of the considerations that we've encountered that are resulting in a revisioning for the project? Well, there's very complex geologic conditions around the sea. We've got some slides and we'll go into some detail on that. We've encountered water availability issues, right? The Salton Sea is a story of water. The creation and the issues around us are all related to water. So we'll talk a little bit about water supply and water availability. Cost and funding. Patrick talked a little bit about the sources of funding for the project, but they are limited. So we are facing, developing a project within these budget constraints. We'll talk a little bit about timeline, and we'll give you guys an opportunity to provide comments, and we'll answer some of your questions tonight. So first off, we talked a little bit about the geologic conditions. So what have we done? Well, we've been out here and completed a very robust geotechnical investigation of the site. That includes numerous borings, that includes geologic sounding lines, really to characterize and understand what the soil conditions under this project footprint are, because they are highly variable around the sea. So on the snapshot there is just a footprint of what the previous project had looked like, about 150-acre lake, indicating where the locations of that geotechnical testing occurred. So what are some of those site conditions that we're faced with? We're faced with very soft clays. Uh-oh. Is the video? Oh, doesn't look like. There would have been a video on here, but the video image on the left is one of our geotechnical engineers that will literally just bounce on that soil. So with a little bit of movement, he starts wiggling the soil, and that tells you just how soft, just how saturated that soil is. For anybody who does construction, you'll recognize that's an incredibly difficult environment to build anything on, let alone massive berms to contain a lake or wetland area. We have permeable fine sands, so we don't have a lot of clay content in that soil, so water wants to seep through these areas. We have the San Andreas Fault literally right behind us, so potential risk and understanding of what those earthquake impacts may have in designing a system that will be robust and hold up to those seismic movements. And then that ground motion and certainly a high level of barnacles in the soil. So very complex, very difficult geologic conditions to contend with when designing a project. On the water supply, so we talked about water being the story of the Salton Sea, and it's an emerging story. And the Salton Sea is a dynamic biological area, and we've seen things develop that we hadn't encountered, that we hadn't anticipated. So we have all these agricultural drains feeding the sea. That's our current source of water for the sea. And we've seen these emergent wetlands form and create around the sea that we hadn't anticipated. As the sea recedes and as the playa areas are exposed, these wetlands are emerging based on the water coming out of these drains. And these are critical habitat for a number of species, endangered rails, endangered pupfish. And so we want to design a project that minimizes or eliminates any impacts to those species. So the drain water availability has become a critical question to answer. And we've been looking at ways that we can siphon off water and utilize that for our project without negatively impacting those species and those wetlands. So in the image there, you'll see it's a little hard to read, obviously, but we've got paper copies you can come up and take a look at later. But those colored areas, the magenta and green, are areas where we've identified and mapped these emergent wetlands in the north end of the sea. The green areas are within the entirety of the North Lake project, and we don't have anybody from the state with us today, but there is a broader North Lake project envisioned that will be developed based on what we learn on the pilot demonstration project. The pilot project is there on the very far right-hand side. So managing, navigating, understanding the implications of diverting water, minimizing those impacts to those developing natural resources is critical. We're still looking at groundwater resources. The last thing we want to do is tap into our local drinking water supply in the Indio subbasin through CVWD. But we have non-potable groundwater resources right behind us. We have Chocolate and Orcopio groundwater basins that in the previous iteration of the project, based on the water demand for a 150-acre lake, we didn't expect to be a reasonable or reliable source of water. There just wasn't enough natural recharge to be sustainable and allow that water for long-term use in that lake. But now that we've reanalyzed it because of some of the other constraints, we're realizing this could be a valuable source of water. In those summer months where the ag drain runoff is really critical for that wetland, that groundwater resource may be some of that makeup water. That groundwater has slightly better water quality than that drain water. It can be used for mixing. So there's an opportunity to capitalize on that groundwater basin that we're currently continuing our investigation in. So I've been talking a lot about constraints, but you guys all probably came to hear about what that new vision is. So pseudo drum roll here. Let's share it. So this is our updated concept plan. So the team has worked really hard to develop this based on those constraints, geologic, cost, and water supply, to develop what we believe is the true strong vision for the project. So this is a mix of lake habitat. This is a mix of wetland habitat and a mix of wetland species, some engineered wetlands on the upstream side that will allow for natural treatment of the drain water before entering into a smaller 30-acre lake, and then some naturalized, unmaintained wetland areas on the other end of the sea, the southeast end of the project footprint there, that can serve as mitigation, that can serve as natural habitat, that would be much like some of the natural wetlands that we see emerging, just a little more engaged, a little enhanced with the design, eliminating some of the invasive species, but allowing for some of those critical endangered species to have habitat.
So Chuck, you mean that whole piece on top, is that what you're referring to? Or that little piece, or you're talking about a certain location there? Well, yeah, because that's confusing.
Yeah, and I apologize, it's a little difficult to read with the light here. But you can see this upper area would be that engineered treatment wetland. So we've got about 40 acres total of wetland, roughly 25 to 30 in this location based on our water demand and water quality requirements, and 10 to 15 in that unengineered or non-treatment wetland, with this being the 30-acre lake centered on the North Shore Yacht Club. The backside, unfortunately, it didn't print on this, but there should have been a background. You would see the sea would be in this location, and then this would be the upland side. So talking about the current schedule, where are we at? Again, difficult to read. We can go through this, but right now we're continuing to work on the conceptual design, refining it, taking all that great information we've obtained and working it into our engineering analysis and design documents, really with a goal of August 2026 of breaking ground. We know it's ambitious. We know we've got a lot ahead of us. We've got a lot of permitting. We've got a lot of agreements to get done. We've got operations and maintenance to figure out, but we're pushing hard, and we understand the urgency, and we really are hopeful that we can break ground in August of 2026. Just threw this up here for anybody who has a question about what that wetland might look like. We've always envisioned a lake, or you've heard a lot about a lake. Now that we're introducing wetland to that, is anybody in the room familiar with Valley Sanitary District and the wetlands that used to be out there at their treatment plant? If so, this is an image of that. Kind of tragic. We lost that as a resource for the desert. It was an amazing walking trail. Anybody who's a birder, it was a world-class birding site. We're really hoping to bring a little bit of flavor of that and introduce that here in the North Shore area. Thank you very much.
And Chuck, I just wanted to mention, we do have a representative from the state here, Miguel Hernandez, who is the public relations officer for the Salton Sea Management Program, and has been a strong partner in community education. And this plan was developed in collaboration with the state. We spent 2 days in Sacramento with a team of 18 people working on different options. So one little thing I wanted to point out is the white line between the upper portion and the lower portion is just representative of one of the many challenges we had to deal with the site. There's a large stormwater drainage flow area that had to be addressed going through there. So that's why there's that gap there. I just wanted to point that out.
Supervisor, maybe I'll add a couple more comments too to add on what Chuck presented. So the other thing we want to look at collectively is how can we create more recreational opportunities around this concept, right? And that's going to include looking at a trail system that can help kind of maybe in some parts go through the wetlands or right adjacent to the wetlands, connected with the 30-acre lake. There's the 30-acre lake on the back end up against the sea. That water gets held in with a series of berms. And so on top of that, there'll be a trail system around that. And eventually down the line, and this is going to be other projects, and we'll be looking to line up other funding and grants for that, is we want to be able to connect that trail system all the way down to the State Beach project further south, right? So there can be continuity out here for a trail system. So that's an important component of this. We're also going to be working with Desert Recreation System and others to continue to look at opportunities in and around this area for community pools, for other things, because the 30-acre lake itself is going to be more limited to boating, right, fishing, things that don't, because of the water, unfortunately, won't allow swimming in the lake. So we want to continue to look for other opportunities to have that in and around the general area, working with Desert Rec on other projects. So I did want to add a little bit about that. So as Supervisor mentioned, I think county team, Salton Sea Authority, the state, all the partners are focused on trying to take this concept and get it on the ground as quickly as we can. Our best estimate today is about 2 years. We're going to do everything we can to try to meet that. There's still steps that have to happen along the way, including permitting with the state and the federal authorities, acquiring the land access, the rights of way, all those things. But the team is working hard on that. So really, as Supervisor mentioned, we wanted to come out today, provide an update, hear from you, and get your thoughts. In a minute here, we're going to open it up to questions. And for those that are here, do you want to maybe hold up your hand and we'll go around. I think we have a mic, or maybe you can come up here to the mic. And if you're online and you want to submit a question, if you through the Zoom, if you can just chat it in, and Douglas is going to help us get those questions too, and be able to answer this. So with that, let me turn over to the supervisor before we open it up to questions. Anything else you want to add,
I
Sue?
just want to add that this is where it's going to be really important that you speak your mind. You know, I think it's going to be critical that you let us know what it is that you want to see. You know, for example, one of the questions that continuously comes up, and what I was hoping for in the first concept, if you will, was that we could go swimming. That we could have a location here in which the water quality would be one in which allows one to go swimming and there'd be enough water. Well, the issue here is what I'm hearing is that we won't be able to go swimming. All right. And there's reasons for it, and I think the engineers can explain it better than I, the scientists can explain it better than I, but if we can't go swimming in the lake, then what can we do as a county with our partners to maybe build a lagoon or a pool or something so that our families can go swimming? Just an idea, you know, something that in which people could appreciate, especially in the summer. You know, folks have thought about the trails. All right. I think in the first concept we had longer trails. Obviously, it was a larger concept, more than what we're presenting here now by another half. Is it possible that some way, somehow, we link the trails to the CV link so that people, because the CV link is coming, it's going to Coachella, and eventually you're going to get to Mecca. Can we actually get it to the Salton Sea? Can we get it here to North Shore? Is it something you want to do or not? Do you care for it? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I'm not sure. You know, we're talking about issues around climate change, and we're talking about issues around reducing greenhouse gas emissions and more exercise. Okay. Can we do bike trails? Can we do something in which people can maybe get around rather than using a vehicle? Can use their bike or maybe even a small little golf cart of sorts. This is something in which where maybe we can get a little creative. And obviously it's going to require us to go out and look for more funding, because that's all going to cost money. But nonetheless, though, I think that if we put a plan together and we're shovel ready, then we can also demonstrate to the state and to the federal government that we have this concept. It's not just pie in the sky. We have it on paper. We already started a certain phase of it, and we need funding for this next phase, if you will. So with that, I just want to make sure that you understand that it's important that you let us know what your thoughts are and what you'd like to see, because if not, this is going to be an approach that could potentially become a top-down approach, and no one likes it. This is why we're here. We want a bottom-up approach. So we're open to suggestions, ideas, your concerns.
Thank you, Supervisor. So maybe we'll ask if there's any folks, if you want to do questions, if you don't mind lining up here at the mic, and then we'll check back online in a minute. See if there's any questions submitted online. So.
There you go. One brave soul. That's all it takes, and then lower that, Margarita? There you go.
Hola, buenas noches. Mi nombre es Sandra Ramírez. Yo soy residente de la ciudad de Coachella, pero mis papás y mis hermanas viven en Meca y yo también viví en Meca por 6 años. Entonces, yo sentí cómo son bueno, muy de cerca con el Salton, sí, todo lo que, los olores y todo. Mi pregunta, bueno, más bien es como recalcar lo que dijo el supervisor, de que nosotros como comunidad, yo como comunidad sí me gustaría ver que se reavivara el Salton Sea, porque yo creo que no solamente para los residentes, que tuviéramos un espacio para poder disfrutar, un sendero, algo opcional para poder sacar a los niños. Y yo siento que si se pudiera hacer eso, no solamente estamos hablando de cómo se puede promover la salud física, sino también la salud mental y emocional, porque los psicólogos es lo que recomiendan: salga a caminar, vaya a buscar un espacio abierto, pero desafortunadamente pues no tenemos las condiciones y ni la seguridad, porque puede uno ir a caminar pero no es seguro. Entonces, si se crean espacios intencionalmente para que nosotros los comunales los usemos, creo que sería ideal, porque estaríamos cubriendo muchas áreas, porque también estamos hablando de que se pudieran abrir negocios y se activaría la economía a final de cuentas, que esto es lo que todos queremos. O puede ser que si se crea un lugar como el amor nace de la vista, si hay algo que a alguien le guste, pues tal vez quieran venir a invertir, y puede ser que se creen trabajos también para nosotros los que vivimos aquí en el este del Valle de Coachella, que sabemos que la mayoría son trabajadores estacionales, pero ¿por qué no tener un trabajo seguro todo el año? Entonces sí, yo estoy de acuerdo en eso, de que sí deberíamos de tener lugares para que nosotros podamos disfrutar de lo que ya tenemos, pero que se cree el ambiente óptimo para poder usarlo. Y también tengo una pregunta: ¿cuánto tiempo les duró o les tomó para hacer ese diseño que nos mostraron ahorita? Y si es que dentro de ese diseño se involucró también a la comunidad. Gracias.
So the question is, how long did it take us to come up with this new concept, and to what degree was the community involved with either the study potentially or the new concept? I'm not sure.
I'll start with that. Señora Ramírez, gracias. Este diseño llevamos como 2 años más o menos haciendo estudios diferentes. I'm telling her about 2 years of studies de ver la condición de geotech del agua, hacer estudios de agua. Y estamos ahora para enseñárselo a la comunidad, para oír sus comentarios, sus preguntas. Así que esta es la razón de tener esta cita, esta reunión hoy, para que podamos saber de ustedes y ver qué piensa y dar información. Así que estamos todavía en el momento de finalizar los diseños y queremos oír de la comunidad qué ideas tienes. So just share with her. We're really here to hear from the community on the project and get their thoughts. So I don't know if either one of you want to talk a little bit about the studies today. You kind of touched on them, Chuck, and the process moving forward, or Patrick.
Yeah, we highlighted a couple of the key studies that were done. The geotech study, which has really been critical. So we just never had that information, and that's advised a lot of the design work that's completed to date and the concept you're seeing. We've completed the water supply assessment. We've looked at the drain water. We looked at potential canal water as a source. We did an entire water supply matrix analysis that worked with many of the water stakeholders regionally and statewide to understand what the water supply options were. We've completed infrastructure studies. We've completed some flood mapping and hydrology and hydraulic analysis to understand how much water is coming off of the hills and the watersheds behind us, making sure that we can protect the infrastructure we're going to put in place. We've done surveying work and bathymetric surveying work, so understanding the terrain and the underwater terrain and how that may impact the design. So we really have accomplished a tremendous amount of work relative to the initial stages of this design. And that is all advised and led us down this collective path that we're sharing with you today. But I want to reiterate that this isn't locked in stone, and this is an opportunity to get the community's feedback, to solicit your input on what this needs to look like. It's a concept up there today. We have not developed 30, 60, 90, or 100% drawings. We're not prepared to put this out to bid today. We want to get that feedback. We want to understand the community's needs. How can we implement that into the practical geologic engineering constraints that we've presented?
So very quickly, though, maybe if we can explain, it took 2 years to do this study, but we had like 30 years of understanding we should have done something. And I guess the community wants to know as well what happened during those 30 years. And so was it lack of funding, lack of political will, lack of cohesion? I mean, I think that's a very honest question. I mean, I have my response, but and it may be a little harsh,
Yeah.
but I'll let you all maybe.
Well, everybody up here is looking at me, and I'm looking out at Miguel and saying, now, I think the state would be the first to admit that they were late in addressing this problem. They had, as part of the QSA that was signed in 2003, there was a period of time afforded the state to develop solutions to address the problems. And unfortunately, during that period, it was about a 15-year period, they were not being held accountable. And as a result of not being held accountable, things went unaddressed. And I have to say that under the current administration, I think Supervisor Perez and everybody that's been working on this project, this is a different day and it's a different team. I kind of characterize this project as starting at, from outer space to 35,000 feet and landing the plane. There actually was 2 different types of studies that took place. The first study was just the site selection process done by the state, actually, and that was a public process where they identified 4 separate project areas. And then so based on that, we identified this project because of its proximity to the yacht club and the importance of creating a community amenity in association with that historic investment. And then we started doing some geotechnical work to inform the project that was conceived, which it was conceptual. And once we did that geotechnical work, once we approached that problem, we found that getting access to the site to do the boring and testing was going to take us 2 or 3 years. That alone, just getting permission from the federal government. But because of an agreement reached between the state, the federal government, to address challenges on the Colorado River, frankly, we were able to elevate the priority of this to get on the site sooner. So I think right now we are kind of at the point where we're landing the plane. And I think everybody that's part of the project team recognizes the critical importance of community input into what this final project looks like. This project is, and I say it's the final project, it's the beginning project. The state has much larger projects in this area that are going to be associated with and relate to this. So what we do here will inform what they do. So yeah, thanks for the question. We need your input to create this final vision that ends up being kind of a piece of this overall puzzle that will be a real resource for future generations.
So another point to your question, was the community involved, right? And so let's be mindful. We got to this part solely because the state did a different study of sorts in which they provided a different concept altogether. And you touched on it, Pat. And that concept had 3 areas or maybe even 4 areas. I can't remember exactly what they were, right? And during that time, the state was actually meeting with the community members to figure this out as to what potentially that concept could look like, meaning like a north, a mid, a south end. And then at the end of the day, we all decided, well, we should have it in the middle, because it's closer to North Shore. And that's how we got here. Right? So I just want to make sure I answer your question, because you had like 2 or 3 in one. And so, and once again, this can change. I hope that we get somewhere though, because I do know that right now the state is really engaged in this and is really hoping that we move forward with this concept. However, what's missing is everything else, the recreation, the community health, the mental health aspect. That's really, really important. And I think that's why it's important that you raise your points, and obviously you want to be included. We want to include those concepts into the next phase, if you will.
Buenas tardes o buenas noches. Mi nombre es Mario Bautista y resido aquí en la ciudad de North Shore o el pueblo de North Shore. Mi pregunta sería, ¿el lago, todo lo que está alrededor de nuestras comunidades, es patrimonio de la nación?
No entiendo. Patrimonio, what do you mean? ¿Qué? You understand, Margarita?
No, si es patrimonio de la nación.
Or if it's like a monument, or, no es designado. It's not designated. No es designado de un patrimonio.
No.
Es un lago que ha existido por años, ¿verdad? Histórico. Pero la tierra abajo donde está el lago tiene diferentes dueños. Algunos son del gobierno federal, también de distritos de irrigación o partes privadas. Explain there's different owners underneath the ownership of the lake.
So it's not a national monument, no es un monumento nacional, pero sí hay dueños. En diferentes partes de donde está el Salton Sea alrededor sí hay diferentes dueños. Y por esa razón también duramos mucho tiempo llegar a este punto, porque tenemos que hablar con estos dueños. A nivel federal hay dueños, los tribus son dueños, el distrito de agua también son dueños, y también hay gente privada que son dueños. Then there's also owners like the tribe, IID, federal government, and individuals that actually own pieces of the land, and some of that is even underwater.
Pero entonces no se entiende el por qué piden dinero al país para hacer proyectos donde la tierra no es del gobierno, no es de una pura persona o como se diga. Entonces yo no entiendo por qué piden dinero para hacer proyectos del gobierno, que es dinero de toda la nación, para hacer proyectos que son diferentes dueños y socios.
Porque si no hacemos nada, Señor, vamos a seguir respirando aire que le va a afectar a su familia.
Eso es lo primero que se debería de hacer.
Por eso lo estamos haciendo.
Pues se me hace raro que digan que están pidiendo dinero para
Pero
hacer
yo no le
proyectos.
estoy pidiendo dinero a usted.
¿Perdón?
No estoy pidiendo dinero a usted. Lo que está pasando aquí es, sabemos que este puede ser un crisis. Y si no hacemos nada, va a ser peor. Ya sabemos ahorita que hay niños que van a la escuela y están sangrando de la nariz. ¿Y por qué? Y están cerca de aquí de estas escuelas. Sabemos que hay gente de tercera edad que ahorita ya no pueden respirar como antes. Eso es por el polvo que está en el aire. Se tiene que hacer algo, Señor. No lo podemos dejar solo y entonces dejar a la gente de una manera u otra que se vaya a herir. Y tal vez otras personas que pueden hablar mejor que yo en este momento, pero es como yo lo miro.
Sí, pero lo que yo me refiero que están hablando de otro tipo de proyectos antes de ver en las comunidades, de lo mismo que usted está diciendo, del daño que nos hace como personas.
Ajá.
Entonces, están hablando primero de proyectos que no están relacionados a la prioridad que es las comunidades del alrededor del lago.
Okay, so what he's saying is that we're talking about this from an aspect of not thinking about public health before talking about maybe the environmental health, which I think he's got a point. However, when you start talking about the shallow waters and how that's going to cover the dust, I think that's critical that you actually, as the engineers, to be able to explain that. because people need to understand that by doing something on the edges also has to deal with helping the public health. And people don't understand that, so we need to be clear on that. So whoever wants to take a crack at it.
Well, I think public health is our highest priority, right? You know, that there should be no question whether or not the changes taking place around the sea are causing adverse health effects. If they are, they should be being addressed. Right? So that's a separate issue that we're laser focused on. In fact, when I leave here tonight, I'm going up to Owens Lake to look at how they work that problem to make sure that we're getting the same equitable treatment here that they're getting up there. So we can, as they say, walk and chew gum at the same time. I think that it is going to be always, it's going to constantly be a battle of managing resources, but this resource was specifically designated in a public financing for a project of this type. And all of these challenges are met with the different constraints of the financial resources. But health and safety, we just need to find the money necessary to make sure that those problems are addressed. I know Supervisor Perez has been engaged in this issue for many, many years, and his active involvement on CARB and otherwise it's a high priority. The UCR had a summit, had a symposium last week and discussed this issue in great detail. It is really important that we put that question to bed, that we answer that question, that people around the sea know that they don't have to worry about that, and if they have to be concerned about, if they should be concerned about it, that they're being honestly told what the concerns are, right? But I don't think we're not in a position where we need to look at it as an either-or proposition. Trust us when we tell you that health and safety is our highest priority.
Okay, but let me ask you this. You're right. Look, when I first started this meeting today, remember when I said to you when I was in the state legislature, people didn't even know what the Salton Sea was? They didn't even know it existed. And so we finally started getting someone with trying to mitigate the Salton Sea. But there were different viewpoints as to what for. Some folks think the environmental aspect is more important than the public health. That's real. And I'm not going to deny that. I know that for a fact because I had a fight with some of them. And to this day, I still have to fight with them. Some folks feel the economic aspect is more important than the public health. Look, for me, and I think where you're coming from, which I agree with, the most important aspect in which we can cover the other two as well is the public health aspect. I hear you. Unfortunately, it's taken a long time for people in Sacramento to hear us, and even that's still a struggle. Even that's still a fight. Because if it wasn't a struggle or it wasn't a fight, we wouldn't be in this situation right here, right now.
Muchísimas gracias, muy amables por su atención. Estaremos en contacto.
Gracias a usted, señor.
Good evening. My name is Max Ochoa. I'm a resident of North Shore. I have two questions. I'm glad that Patrick brought up the research that was brought up at the Salton Sea Summit. So the first question is about the new research that was pertaining to the water quality and the sediment, what the sediment contains, and if this project is basically being informed by that, and if so, will whatever concept that we have right now will be subject to change based on that new research or new findings that we have in the recent years?
I don't think anything we're doing now would change that. I mean, this is, in fairness, this is a relatively small project with relatively large community benefit and community impact. The problems that you're talking about are at scale around the sea, right? The communities closest to the sea are the ones most affected by it. And I think that the work that UCR is informing that. And I appreciate the question, and I could talk about it all night. We are here tonight to talk specifically about the North Shore project, but I really do appreciate the community's concern about health and safety. I think it's something that the state is certainly aware of, and part of the challenge, without getting too far afield, is that you have a multitude of different agencies with different responsibilities overseeing the project. And what we're trying to do is consolidate that conversation so that all of these questions that are being raised by UCR, all of the data that's being gathered by South Coast Air Quality Management District, the Imperial County Air Pollution Control District, the tribe, Comité Cívico de Valle, and all these people who have all these information that would suggest we have some problems, that we can better analyze that and inform people as to what's going on. So that is taking place. As it relates to answer your question in brief, this project will not deter or affect anything that's going on in that space.
The second question that I had was, given the rapid changing of the landscape of the Salton Sea, this study took essentially 2 years to make. Will that be a problem?
His mic just went out.
Well,
There you go.
2 years that it took to take, well, by the time that it's ready to break ground, will you have to have new design or new changes to be made in order to fit the new Salton Sea landscape?
The simple answer is no. Definitely, we look at, as part of our analysis and design, the long-term implications of the receding sea and make sure that we're analyzing, we're modeling, we're understanding how that's characterized both in the surface water as well as the groundwater and the impacts that'll have. So the systems that we design, the grading systems, the berms that will hold this lake and these wetlands will all be designed to adapt to those changing conditions with the receding sea.
Got it. Thank you.
I want to go back to say the opposite, that this project will inform the greater work, right? This is a demonstration project, and some of the problems that we identified are different than what we're finding over in Desert Shores, are different than what they found down at the Species Conservation Habitat Project. And they should accelerate the implementation of projects to address the concerns that you raised. Should.
Thank you. My name is Ed Luna, and